In this video we'll look at an experience report of the 212th Volksgrenadierdivision from the Battle of the Bulge, which I found in the German military archives. So this is an actual German perspective, unlike those of various other channels that are presented by people that usually don't read German, let alone have access to proper sources. The report is particularly interesting because in various cases it points out the strengths and capabilities of US troops. For instance, their tenacity in defense and excellent artillery fire. The report deals with the operations by the 212th Volksgrenadierdivision against the American 4th Division during 16 to 27 December 1944. Initially, the Volksgrenadierdivision was attacking, but had to switch to defense rather soon and took heavy losses. The division was part of the 7th Army, which made little progress on the southern flank. This was in contrast to other armies like the 5th Panzer Army that made the most progress during the Battle of the Bulge. Before we take a look at the report itself, a short explanation what exactly a Volksgrenadierdivision was and how it was different from the regular German infantry division. Volksgrenadier basically means People's Grenadier. These divisions were part of the German army, but in terms of training and military laws were under the authority of the SS. The current research here is a bit complicated, since some authors note that the Volksgrenadierdivisions were the result of the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, taking over the replacement army after the failed assassination attempt on Hitler on 25th July 1944. The problem is, Himmler already on the 15th July 1944 got some authority from Hitler for a new batch of army divisions, which later were also renamed into Volksgrenadierdivisions. The important aspect is that the Volksgrenadierdivisions were overall not better equipped than regular German army divisions. Some authors note they were worse equipped, but in my opinion, the differences were limited. Let's compare some aspects of the Volksgrenadierdivision to the Infantry Division 44. Note, these are authorized ranks and there are also different patterns and sub-patterns for each division, so these numbers are a general guideline. Let's start with the artillery. The Infantry Division 44 had 33 light howitzers, 105 mm, whereas the Volksgrenadier-Division had 24. For heavy artillery, the Infantry Division 44 had 9 150 mm heavy howitzer, yet the Volksgrenadier-Division had 12. Additionally, the Volksgrenadier-Division had a special artillery battalion, namely an anti-tank gun artillery battalion called Pack-Artillerieabteilung. These had 18 dual-purpose guns with 75 mm anti-tank guns. Note that both divisions had a dedicated anti-tank battalion as well. For the infantry, both had 3 infantry regiments. Each of these regiments had 2 battalions, and each battalion had 3 infantry companies and 1 heavy company. So in total, each division had 18 infantry companies and 6 heavy companies, although the infantry companies were equipped and staffed differently. So let's look at that. The regular infantry company of the Infantry Division 44 had 13 light machine guns and 2 heavy machine guns. Whereas for the Volksgrenadier Division, this was only 9 light machine guns, but additionally these companies had 2 so-called submachine gun platoons or Sturmzüge, namely assault platoons. For more information we have a book on these. These Sturmzüge were in fact equipped with the MP44, later called Sturmgewehr 44, the first assault rifle. The issue is, due to the lack of ammo and magazines, even though the units might have been issued the assault rifle, in reality it might not have had access to them. Since the units of the Infantry Division 44 had also more authorized manpower, namely 113 versus 117 in the Volksgrenadier Company, the Infantry Division 44 was generally better off here, unless the Sturmzüge were fully equipped and properly trained. The heavy companies of the Infantry Division 44 had 3 light machine guns, 6 heavy machine guns, 4 heavy mortars, and 6 medium mortars. For the 1st Grenadier Division, this was 1 light machine gun, 8 heavy machine guns, 4 light infantry support guns, and 6 medium mortars. Note that the light infantry support gun was the Leichtinfanteriegeschütz 37, which was basically a repurposed anti-tank gun, so it did not have a steep fire angle like the Infanteriegeschütz 18 and thus was far less versatile. In terms of anti-tank weapons, the Infantry Division 44 had 108 Panzerschreck in their infantry anti-tank companies, whereas the Volksgrenadier-Division had 162 Panzerschreck-Theirs. For the anti-tank battalion, it is a bit more complicated, since there were at least 4 variants for the Infantry Division 44. In short, the Volksgrenadier-Division had 14 armored tank destroyers, like Stuks or Jagdpanzer 38, generally called the Hetzer, while the Infantry Division at best would have 10 Stuks or Jagdpanzers, but in some cases up to 3 more total guns. In terms of additional infantry units, so outside the infantry regiments, the regular Infantry Division 44 had a complete Fusilier battalion with 4 companies, whereas the Volksgrenadier only had 1 Fusilier company. For the combat engineers, the Infantry Division 44 had 3 companies, whereas the Volksgrenadier had only 2. So in total, the Infantry Division had 7 additional companies, whereas the Volksgrenadier had only 3, which is basically 1 battalion less. In overall, there was a difference between the 2 divisions, but the difference seems to be limited. It is clear that Volksgrenadier Division had less manpower, and a look at the supply units also indicated that it was a bit worse off here. The regular Infantry Division 44 had a transport for 210 tons, whereas the Volksgrenadier had only 180 tons. In terms of anti-tank guns and heavy artillery, the Volksgrenadier Division was slightly better off. So I would say the Volksgrenadier Division was weaker, but to a limited degree, and in the field it probably came down to the fact which division had lately received reinforcements or not. Now what about our Volksgrenadier Division, the 212th? Well, it was originally the 212th Infantry Division, which was badly mauled in summer 1944, and from its remnants, the 578th Volksgrenadier Division was created, to be then renamed into the 212th Volksgrenadier Division in September 1944. In November 1944, in the assessment of the 80th Army Corps, the division was rated as experienced in combat, and what was even more important in this situation, well stocked with personnel and material. Although there were some shortcomings, for instance, the authorized strength of 14 Sturmgeschütze was not reached, only 4 were available. Similarly, fresh troops had only received limited training. A major problem that was reoccurring in the war diary was the lack of fuel. So let us look at the report, which is from early January 1945. One major red line that goes through the whole report is the lack of heavy infantry weapons. Heavy infantry weapons in this case are mortars and infantry support guns. It is particularly noted in the beginning that if heavy weapons cannot be brought with the infantry, then at least there should be a lot of combat engineers equipped with flamethrowers and shuttle charges, particularly for fighting in villages and towns. It is specifically noted that even the best organized artillery support can't replace heavy infantry weapons. The reasoning is that artillery needs to be used in concentration to have a strong effect, but this would also mean that all elements of the infantry could not be supported by the artillery for a while. Additionally, artillery support is far harder to coordinate and slower than close support weapons. The reason for the lack of these weapons is later explained. It was due to the fact the division had to cross a river, and there was a limited amount of equipment to transport men and material across the river. As a result, mainly manpower was transferred. Furthermore, equipment to transfer heavy equipment was lacking as well. Another aspect was that the American artillery had very good recon, so it could engage not only the bridge building units, but also areas where the units crossed the river. As such, the construction of the bridges was delayed, for one bridge by over 48 hours, whereas the other bridge could never be finished. Other issues with the river crossing were delays that, although the time of attack was correct, in some cases the infantry was not in position to exploit the initial artillery bombardment, and to make matters worse, that the American units were on alert. The next aspect is about German artillery fire. It is noted that this only makes sense if the enemy positions are properly identified. But since there was no proper air recon done beforehand, this was not the case. It is specifically mentioned that firing on suspicion in hopes of destroying the enemy communication wires to blind the enemy for a certain period of time does not work. It is explained that this does not work against the Americans because they were well equipped with radios. Another issue was that the attack area for the division was too wide. It is noted that the width was 20 kilometers for 4 attacking battalions. This was too wide against American units, since although the battalions were able to penetrate the American lines, the American units did not become discouraged and held their positions. It is particularly noted that the Americans who were cut off in their positions showed a tenacity that made it hard for German supplies and heavy weapons to be brought forward. As a result, the German attacking battalions were engaged from the sides and had to themselves dig in, and that supply had to be brought in by special columns that had to fight their way to their own troops. Later on in the report, it was stressed that the enemy positions, particularly in houses but also in the open areas, fought on and were tenacious and didn't give up. It is particularly noted that in hopeless situations, the enemy never gave up. In some cases, fortified houses had to be destroyed with anti-tank mines or Panzerfausts. It is concluded that in an attack where deep penetration into enemy lines is conducted, there must be further reserves to clear up enemy units that were bypassed, or that the objectives for the attack have to be more limited. One aspect that receives special mention in the report is the capabilities of US artillery and air superiority. It is noted that US artillery was superior not only in number, but also particularly in observation, like reconnaissance planes and observation vehicles, while the Germans had to use heavy infantry radios, which limited the mobility. According to the report, US artillery showed very little weaknesses and that their fire concentration was quick and mobile with heavy use of ammunition. Additionally, there was constant harassment fire during the day and night on important areas of the German rear, which created not only major disruption but also heavy losses. American artillery reconnaissance planes are mentioned several times. These allowed a constant observation of German troops. Related in terms of air superiority, it is mentioned that the division experienced air attacks, but only to a limited degree. In terms of coordination between US ground troops and air support, the report notes that it was effective, although there were occasional errors. For instance, one friendly fire incident is mentioned. Yet generally, the coordination between the two seemed to be very good. For instance, it is particularly mentioned that the artillery marked several targets with smoke rounds, which were then successfully attacked by the enemy fighter bombers. Finally, it is noted that the enemy had excellent radar direction finding, which were able to rapidly detect even the smallest radios and successfully attack them with artillery fire. Another major problem that is mentioned is the lack of anti-tank weapons, particularly of the heavy variant, so anti-tank guns and tank destroyers like Sturmgeschütze. It is noted, although the surprise against the enemy on the 16th December 1944 was achieved, but this could not be exploited because there was a lack of heavy weapons, particularly of mobile anti-tank units. This was a major issue since, according to the report, all US counterattacks had tank support. The lack of anti-tank weapons had several reasons. First off, crossing the river was a major issue. Second, the number of available Sturmgeschütze was lower than the authorized strength. Third, anti-tank guns, although available, could not be brought forward. Fourth, the Americans used tanks either as artillery in long-range support or well covered with infantry, which meant that Panzerfaust and other close anti-tank weapons could only be used with limited effectiveness. So apparently these Germans were not fighting Brad Pitt's unit from Fury. Thanks to Andrew for this glorious remark. The report notes that due to how the US used tanks, the Sturmgeschütze would have been necessary to engage US tanks. It is later mentioned that the division had no prior experience fighting on the Western Front. As such, I suspect that the unit might have been used to enemy tanks being up close and personal from their Eastern Front experience. Get back to the Western Front. After a few days of combat, the Germans had to switch to the defense. The report specifically mentions that the reason why the US attacks were successful. Of course, the material superiority is mentioned, but it is not given as the sole reason. It particularly notes the excellent training of the American soldiers as Einzelkämpfer, literally lone fighter, and the ever-present fire discipline. The artillery superiority was already covered. It is also stressed that all tank attacks were conducted with infantry close by, so that the German infantry could not really employ the close anti-tank weapons like the Panzerfaust or Panzerschreck. Additionally, US tanks were also just used basically as artillery, as mobile artillery, where they suppressed the German units while the American infantry moved forward. Although German artillery tried to engage these tanks, they were not able to destroy any. Another aspect is that the Americans were able to bring in reserves, particularly the 5th American Infantry Division was identified, while the German infantry was tired and worn down from the previous fighting. In terms of German leadership, the report states that the company's commanders lacked experience in larger scale combat and that the company commanders are incapable of leading a company in the field. It is also noted that the Americans were underestimated in various regards, and this is likely due to the fact that this was the first time the division faced an enemy in the West, and thus was lacking experience with the Western allies. Particularly the insufficient supply of radios on the German side against the mobile enemy with superior artillery was an issue that the German commanders had no capability to deal with. It was tried to establish wire-based communications with the battalions, but this was simply not possible. In terms of communication with the division headquarters, there were also major problems. The lack of motorcycle messengers is mentioned, and that replacing them with messengers in cars was completely insufficient. It is noted that up to the regiment the best communication device was the messenger, but he was the slowest, but also the most secure transmitter of information. To summarize, the report seems to be in line with what Professor Neitzel noted in his interview about why the German army failed to conduct counterattacks on the Western Front. Namely, while the German army was still able to operate successfully on the Eastern Front, it was not able to do so on the Western Front. Although some of this might be related to Allied air superiority, this was not the sole reason. The report notes several times the good coordination between the different arms, for instance infantry and tanks as well as artillery. Furthermore, good coordination between ground and air forces as well. The Germans had various problems that became more apparent on the Western Front. The lack of leadership and communication equipment was a major issue, since US forces acted quickly and had good communication equipment. On top of that, Allied radio direction finding with the excellent artillery would limit the effectiveness of use of German radios if they were available at all. Finally, Allied air superiority allowed them to get excellent recon while denying Germans of important recon, which also reduced the effectiveness of German artillery. Thank you to my supporters for making this video possible. Thank you to Andrew for reviewing the script and providing important additions. Thank you for watching and see you next time.